Hi everyone, before we get started, two things. If you like the video, that'd be great, and if you like it a lot, please subscribe. I'm trying to get monetized this year. Now, before we get started, I want to bring up two things. First off, this is going to be kind of like a prelude to my next video, which is going to be another Tool album. Not telling you which one yet, because I like mystery. And two, that I'm going to start with an anecdote. A couple days ago, I was having a conversation with my dad. We were talking about the NFL, specifically trauma-related incidents that players typically endure. You know the one that gets into a headline every couple of years where someone either dies or they get crippled or they have some sort of health condition spurred because of it. Those ones. Now, I don't typically talk about these, even in my typical social life, because I don't watch sports anymore because of, well, this exact reason. And while I was talking with him about it, I brought up the point of the fans would have enough humility to back the players if they wanted to speak against the organization or the teams for putting them in the situation where their health is in such an immediate danger. His response was punctual and completely negated my entire argument. It was super simple. You're assuming these people are conscious of themselves. He was speaking to the fans, of course, but it makes a lot of sense because I don't think a lot of people are, at least not in like the fullest extent of what consciousness can and should be. A lot of people kind of just live, and that's fine, but living without deeper thought sounds rather bland and kind of boring in my opinion. Imagine going through life not once considering what's out there in the universe, if God is real or not, and if the way the world works should be the way it works. Imagine never having those three thoughts. I couldn't imagine, because I have those thoughts rather often, and I like to think about whether there are things out there, whether God is real or not, or if society would be better or not if it was different. I love to think about that. It's such an Herculean task that it feels like something you should dedicate at least some portion of brain power to, and yet some people live flawlessly without doing so. And I think that's where my issue with not being conscious enough comes in. Society and the world at large requires change, and change typically comes from people. Now, when people stagnate in the way of no longer thinking, change doesn't happen. We've witnessed this for the last, 100 years or so in Western society, where we've industrialized, and because of that, we've allowed for things like federal governments and corporations to largely quell any significant thought. Now, don't get me wrong, that means things haven't changed, things have changed, but things have not changed nearly as fast or as frequently as they used to, say, 150 years ago instead of just 100 years ago. This is rather obvious, I think, in history, and I don't know if anyone's really willing to argue this point. Industrialization has stumped human growth, is my point. And because of that, we get weird conversations like NFL fans not being conscious enough of fan injuries because they don't see them as people. He used another argument, one that I don't have a retort to, which is that the players are seen as cattle, specifically linebackers, people who only serve one goal, and that's to hit the other guy. Now, I feel like these guys are in a quandary because on the one hand, their job is so visceral that it's kind of stupid, and on the other hand, it's also one of the most deadly jobs to have. Concurrent head injuries every time you step on the field for your entire life, as long as you can do so. That's kind of insane and not good for anyone's health. But we allow it to happen because we don't necessarily perceive these people as people, at least not the people who watch it. They don't perceive them as real. They perceive them as figures, as, numbers. last names with no first name. It's weird how they view them, but they view players in this very specific lens to where they can appreciate their sportsmanship and ability, but then they don't care about them the second the cameras turn off. And I think this lack of humility towards players is rather representative of how a lot of people live their typical lives, because they have no intuitive thought. There is no deeper meaning. There is no what comes next to them. It's simply they play sports and the sport is violent, so if they get hurt, they get hurt. Which is such a basic and uninteresting view of the world that I can't imagine living like it, because that just means you think of nothing. There is no thought. If you think God isn't real, God simply isn't real. There is no greater argument to it. As an atheist, I hate that. I like to say God isn't real just to, piss people off, but in reality, I like to think of it in a much more nuanced way. I think that if God is real, God does not exist in the biblical nature, but God is much more of an essence, a metaphysical existence. But that's nuance. Whereas people who watch sports and don't care about player injury exist without it. Cat scratching in the background. I don't understand how people can live in such a way. Like I said already, it's weird, it's probably vaguely dystopian, and overall, it's just unhealthy. I don't think it's healthy to not exercise your brain. It's a muscle. People say that for a reason. And when you don't do anything with it, what is it to do but to die? Muscle dies if you don't continuously use it, so I can only imagine the brain does something somewhat similar. I can't imagine how technically brain dead a lot of NFL fans are, because they simply don't process the sport they're watching. And that's not to shit on NFL fans. I used to be a big fan. I still love the Packers to this day, but even I can admit that the sport is terrible. It's a money-guzzling machine that uses people like animals and cares about nothing other than a few business owners. All of this is to say that you should probably be thinking a bit more, probably doing a little bit less TV watching. I don't know, maybe pick up a book. Like, it doesn't take a lot to really get the conscious thought going, but it's at least something worth noting. Like, why would you not care about these things? Seriously, why would you not? Like, especially if you're someone like an NFL fan, you probably have a lot of free time on your hands if you can watch all those games. You have the ability to do other things. But again, it requires that intuitive thought, and I can't wrap my head around how some people just don't have it. Anyways, this was a shorter one. I know it is. Thank you for watching. Like I said before, if you like it, like it. If you like it a lot, subscribe. And Tool video should be out later next week.